GCSE Warfare Through Time short revision clips. We're in the early modern period now, between 1500 and 1700 of warfare. We're going to look at weapons today in a very, very quick, short space of time. Firstly, weapons during this period, we're starting to see new technology come to the fore a little bit more. So you're starting to see more use of gunpowder weapons such as muskets, and obviously those weapons affect the type of military tactics that are deployed on the battlefield. So we're seeing gunpowder weapons becoming the dominant weapon on the battlefield during this period, so we're seeing quite some change. Guns are starting to replace traditional weapons that we saw in the medieval era, such as longbows and crossbows. And developments in science and technology are enabling guns now to be produced that are more powerful, more reliable than ever before. One of the reasons for this was the development, the technological innovation of the matchlock musket mechanism used to fire guns now. And this led obviously to matchlock muskets being used in battle. They did have some advantages that you should know. Unlike arrows, they could penetrate plate armour within a range of about 100 metres. You only needed basic training of about 2 weeks to perfect the skill of firing a musket, unlike a longbow, of course, which took many years to perfect. Still some disadvantages to muskets though at this period. They're not as accurate as a longbow. They have a much slower rate of fire than a longbow. As well as that, it's difficult to keep the smouldering cord alight in damp weather. Reload time was lengthy, and you had to keep cleaning the barrel to keep it free of gunpowder deposits. So you're looking at a few minutes to fire one effective shot with a range of only about 100 metres, which is much shorter than the longbow. Now, as you get towards the 1610s and into the 17th century, you get the more effective flintlock firing mechanism, which created the spark needed to ignite the gunpowder. You don't have to use a smouldering cord. And as a result, flintlock muskets were quicker, less dangerous, more reliable than matchlock muskets, but at the same time they were more expensive, and therefore you don't get to see them being used more often until later on during the 1600s, towards the end of this period. You do get pistols being seen in warfare during this period. Obviously they're smaller, lighter than muskets. You could operate them with only one hand, so you could use them, for example, if you are on a horse in cavalry. You also get England's cast iron industry growing during this period, and therefore making sure that you could manufacture cannons on a much grander scale than before. You get lighter weight cannons called field guns being developed, and you can move them around more easily in battle. Cannons continue to have a limited range though, and their accuracy wasn't great, and therefore artillery still remained a small part of armies during these years. You still get pikes being used quite widely on the battlefield, though when you get into the second half of the 17th century, you start to see bayonets beginning to be fixed to muskets instead. Cavalrymen still use swords, but of course carried pistols now. We've talked about that earlier. In terms of tactics, musketeers and pikemen were often put together in squares, with cavalry placed on their flanks. This is a tactical change, obviously, from medieval times, where archers were on the flanks and cavalry was in the centre. You also start to see some new tactics in square formations being developed during this period. For example, the Dutch counter-march, used in the 1590s by Prince Maurice in the Netherlands, and in the 1620s, the Swedish salvo, used in the Swedish army by Gustavus Adolphus. And these have the advantages that you can hit more targets by firing as a group, and also you could take it in turns to reload, so continuous fire could happen. So overall, what we've considered today is that technology was starting to result in significant change in the types of weapons used during this period. We're starting to see muskets replace the longbow as the dominant force on the battlefield between 1500 to 1700, though it is worth pointing out that limitations remained, and therefore change remained pretty slow and gradual during this period.